slide a lot and talk about why businesses ought to consider not just doing the day-to-day, doing something different, innovating. And universities are quite good at innovation. We're not quite so good at businesses, but we're quite good at innovation. We're quite good at solving problems. I think what you've seen over the last 20 years is businesses and universities have got better at engaging with businesses. It's slightly easier to find your way through most university websites and find the people you're looking for. If that's the point of contact with somebody like me, I suspect. But there's still quite a long way to go. This quote we've used a lot, partly because the guy was Chancellor of the University 30 or so years ago. But it does emphasise this idea about a knowledge economy, about businesses who embrace that knowledge economy and who use the innovation, the knowledge horsepower that the universities like to them have got, will be able to develop. I also quite like it, because I think this idea about universities being kind of the castles and the factories of the future. All those buildings look very similar, and they've all got very high walls. And I mentioned that universities have got better at trying to give business access. They're still not great at it. Universities are still big, complex organisations. They're effectively about 50 businesses loosely roped together. So trying to navigate through them is difficult. If you work for one, it's much harder if you don't work for one and you're trying to get them to do something interesting with them. What I think, this is kind of a confession I guess, but what we've done over the last few years, we'll stand with lots of business events and talk about the mechanisms we have, and that's great because it's tangible. We've definitely got a mechanism. A bit about the difference between business is not necessarily a mechanism. It's the academic somewhere in a university 500 miles from here who is working on something that a colleague next door doesn't know he's doing, but which could make a massive impact on your next range of products. And so the difficulty is not so much the mechanism, it's finding interesting academics and knowledge to fill it with. And without that, the mechanisms really don't do anything for you. For a long time to find things that look like different worlds. Now I've got one slightly smaller world and one slightly bigger world. Really, the academic worlds and the business worlds are very different. There are different time frames, as I'm sure if you work at the university you'll have some feedback on. But there are areas and pockets that will be directly applicable. Now there are lots of areas in universities which we can see are clearly applicable into business. Most universities have marketing departments, they'll have engineering departments, they'll have manufacturing research groups. Some of it is easy to see, some of it is a lot harder. And I think what we realise as a kind of a bigger business engagement team is that often the questions that businesses ask us when they first come in are not really the questions they need the answers to, but something slightly different. And there is that co-creation of, which I guess is the really exciting bit. It's the co-creation of a business with a need, an academic with an expertise, and actually both parties going away with more than they thought they would. So, fundamental science is quite scary, I think. Certainly that is. But there are lots of examples. We're working with lots of businesses, whether they're small or large, who've taken fundamental science, who've taken some really basic material science, or some, all sorts of sciences, and have built them into new products and businesses. And as I say, they're not necessarily all high-tech businesses, including incredibly exciting sectors. Because one thing you can be sure of is that in that picture there's an awful lot of fundamental science at work. There are processes in there, there's technology in there that wouldn't have happened were it not for fundamental science. And I think that's where we sort of see, I'm relatively new to the university world, but having come from industry, there are so many different areas that we would never have considered for our business where we should be working at university to develop products. And there's a real rich tapestry of expertise out there. The difficulty is in finding it. So I'm going to come on to talk about some examples of businesses that we've worked with in Nottingham. And before I do, knowledge transfer partnerships are very similar to innovation partnerships. It's been around for a long time now. It's been around for 40 years last year. There have been about 10,000 of them. And they have that same collaborative model that outlined. What they are is a really good way for businesses to get a good look at the broader university. So often businesses will come in with a specific problem. I make a particular product, the EU are going to outlaw that, no other components of that product. If I can't replace it, I really don't have a business anymore. Universities are good at teasing out those sorts of problems, and that business in particular went away with a completely different range of products, as well as a replacement ingredient for their core product. So, again, similar to innovation partnerships, KTB is in this kind of three-way model. The funding is put in place, the project employs what we call the KTB associates, they work in the business and they deliver the project. So, first example, this is a company called iHolland, about 5 miles away from our office. They're a pretty traditional looking engineering business. They make punching tools for the tableting industry. And one of the things we didn't realise, but actually stickiness in tablets is a real problem. If you have a composition of a tablet that's sticky and some of it sticks to the end of the punch, the next tablet is slightly different. So all of your dosage starts to go out of line very quickly with tableting. So making sure that your punches don't stick to the material they're trying to punch is a really critical element. Now, iHolland were good at what they did. They had good sales, about 75% export before the project. What they would do, if you ran a tableting business and you said, I've got this new drug, I need to make some tablets, they had about 6 coatings and they would pick what they thought was the best coating for you. They'd send you a set of tools and you'd try them. Now, a set of tools then was about 25, it's a big carousel punch. And so they're not cheap things to send around the world. They would do that on just know-how, what they thought would probably be okay. If it didn't work, they'd send you another set until it did work. And that's fine, and I'm sure they would admit that. That's fine for them. For a manufacturer with the factory standing idle, waiting for those tools to arrive, that's not a good solution. So they were interested in what makes tablets sticky. Turns out, we had quite a lot of research in this in the School of Pharmacy, and they used something, we developed something called atomic force microscopy when it came to tableting. So basically what it is, it's a very small arm, and you put something sticky on the end of it, and then you lift it up and you see how much it bends. And you can then tell the force of the stickiness. So you can quantify stickiness to a really accurate level. iHolland have been able to take that and turn that into a solution for their products. What they've also been able to do is look at the huge number of drugs going off patent in the next few years. That means there are things that contract manufacturers haven't tableted before. So there are combinations of materials, combinations of ingredients that they haven't dealt with before. This model that they developed with us allows them to predict how sticky they're going to be based on the ratio of those different ingredients. And they can now send you a tablet which is coated in one of their existing range or with one of the new coatings they created that doesn't stick. So their sales, I'm not allowed to tell you, but they've gone very well. I like this one, I like Chris. Pipers are a really good example that it doesn't have to be a high-tech business. Pipers are located in North Lincolnshire, which is a very rural area. They're surrounded by fields that grow potatoes they use in their crisps. They describe themselves as 4 farmers. They're 4 very canny businessmen farmers. But essentially they buy potatoes, they slice them thinly, they fry them and they pack them. And they sell quite well. They have an unusual model where they only sell in pubs, cafes, restaurants, sort of not in retail. They try to avoid at all costs selling into retail because there's no margin for them. What they really wanted to do was to export to big expat communities around the world. And one of the things that people like most about pipers is that the crisps are a bit quirky. Sometimes they look slightly different, they have some odd shapes, they're really crispy, but they're not quite as uniform as the big brands. The reason for that is that the raw materials that we're getting in vary throughout the course of the year. They manufacture 51 weeks of the year, potatoes are harvested about 6. So they were getting different material and they didn't know how to handle it. Their initial, can you help us increase shelf life, turned into a much bigger project looking at raw materials, how they changed the way they process the crisps while retaining their kind of unique capabilities, but it's now allowed them to export all over the world. But actually the bit inside it is some really fundamental science around starch processing and water and heat and fat uptake and what happens to fat when it's in the bag and all the interactions that are cocoa and then. So for them, they were really surprised. They'd never worked with a university before. They've now started the second project looking at flavours because of all the natural ingredients and flavour carriers they use. It's quite difficult for them to flavour. So they were a really interesting example of where a very simple business, it has 2 ingredients, it has taken on working with a university and got involved in some really interesting science, which is publishable for the academic. Final one is a company called Golden Acres. They're a big manufacturer, contract manufacturer of high-end pet food. So they produce exclusively dry kibble, so the biscuits you get for the cats and dogs. They don't have their own brand, but they have some very expensive customers who sell some very expensive retail brands. They wanted to sell pet food that was made with much more fresh meat. So typically pet food of this kind is made with largely rendered bone meal and meat meal. They wanted to use fresh meat, but there wasn't really a method to do that. There wasn't an extruder on the market that could do that. They found a company in America who said they had a machine that could do it, and they initially said, can you just have a look at this for a couple of days and tell us if you think it will work? The academic said, no, it won't. There's nothing in the literature that says it will. They bought one anyway. And it did work, actually. The academics were wrong. They then said, well, we've not completely given up on you. What we want to know now is how far can we push this? We're currently putting 15% fresh meat into this. How far can that go? Because we're now making it, but we don't really know how it's working. And the academics did a 3-year project looking at exactly what was happening inside that extruder. Very challenging to take a bunch of fresh meat at one end and produce dry kibble at the other end, in an extruder probably twice as long as this, and get it into a bag immediately in a way that doesn't stick to the rest of the product. And they've done it. So they've now got the highest level of fresh meat into their products of any manufacturer anywhere in the world. But they've done it with some really fundamental material science of looking exactly what happens in that extruder. We often talk about small businesses being involved with universities, and it's worth mentioning that half the projects that we've done have been with large businesses. So it isn't just small businesses who have these gaps of knowledge in and around their operations. There's some big businesses there who've done stuff with us because there are areas where they just lack that expertise. Lots of them have downsized their R&D departments over the last few years. That expertise sits in universities, and those businesses are just as keen to get it out and do something with it. So I think, to conclude for me, what's been most interesting in the years that I've been doing this is just seeing the way businesses shift their thinking when they work with the university for a period of time. They may come in with a problem. So they'll come with a problem that they can't solve anywhere, and they'll be desperate to solve it by the time they get to us, I suspect. And if they've fought their way through the website founders, then there's something they can't solve commercially. And it will be a pressing problem for them. It will stop them getting products out. It will stop them developing the new product that the competitor has. But it's not really that question that they need to ask. There's a much bigger question that universities can help with, and it can allow them to take a step back and look at what the processes are. What are the underlying processes? What's the underlying knowledge that we don't really know as a business? One of the large ones on there has a huge core product, which is a massive brand. And there's a key ingredient in that, and they use almost half of it created in the UK. They know all about making that product. They have 4 ingredients for that. They put it in and they get the product out at the end. If the supply of that one ingredient is compromised, they have to stop production. So for them, understanding that there are alternatives and finding out what the alternatives are and what the implications are of processing and what they are on manufacture and shelf life, they don't have that. We had a real job convincing our advisor that a business of that size just didn't know. So it's not just small businesses. There are lots of businesses out there, large and small, who have those little pockets of knowledge that they lack, and universities can help to do that. Thank you very much.